So next I'm going to be teaching you how to demonstrate to your client and also teach them how to find their lumbar neutral and then how to use their glutes, their abdominals, and their serratus to stabilize that position. So Alicia's not been on the therapy ball before, so I'm going to have her just very gently bring your legs to the side so you have a little bit of a wider base of support. And what I would like to do is to make sure that the therapy ball is large enough that when she's sitting, her hips are at 90 degrees and her knees are at 90 degrees. So this is a pretty decent sized ball for her. The other thing I'm going to ask her to do is just to soften your knees a little bit. There you go. And the first thing we're going to do to try to find her neutral is to exaggerate the extension of the lordosis and the flexion of the lordosis. So I'm going to have you just soften your hands and put them on your legs. And I'm going to have you come into extension by arching your back and then come into flexion by kind of slouching. The reason why I like to do this on the therapy ball is she can, and you can relax now, is because she can make minute movements on the therapy ball and it really supports her while she is able to experiment with the amount of lordosis. On a chair, it's a solid surface, and you know the movement is actually more difficult, and the subtlety of the movement isn't as obvious to the client. So by putting them on the therapy ball, they can really feel their ischial tuberosities, you know, right in the therapy ball, and that gives them some proprioceptive feedback. So that if I say, just bring those sit bones back a little bit, now bring those sit bones forward a little bit, and that really gives them some proprioceptive feedback so that they know where they are. Especially if someone is having pain, their proprioceptive feedback may be altered, that it would, they are either feeling the pain signals and so they don't quite know where their body is in space as much. So the proprioceptive feedback combined with the ease of mobility on a therapy ball really is a great place to start to tune them into what's going on in their pelvis and how much they need to extend or flex their back in order to be in a good position. So Alicia, what I'm going to have you do is kind of arch your back and really feel what that extension feels like by pushing your seat bones back, and then push your seat bones forward and really flex your spine. Somewhere in between those two extremes is like a comfortable neutral for you. So where you don't feel too arched and you don't feel like you're slouching and you're not having pain in that position. Okay. So once they do that, then I'm going to say, now do you feel like one sit bone is higher than the other? Mm-hmm. Okay, so we're going to bring that into the ball until it feels neutral. Okay. So what you're having them do is basically correct the amount of extension and flexion, but also if they're holding their hip up into, you know, with in an upslipped position or in a downslipped position, that's kind of helping them autocorrect. So you're giving them a lot of guidance into what's going on at their pelvis at the time. So now that they've found what's reasonably comfortable and you can visually see that, you know, she looks pretty balanced and level, what I'm going to ask you to do now is ever so slightly, I'm going to have you push your heels into the ground. Now that's way too much, okay? So you can see how that contraction pulled her up on the ball. What I really want is just an engagement of the muscle, not a full contraction. Because she could never get through space or get through her day with full contraction. But just a little bit of engagement will help that muscle to fire and to support her. So I'm going to actually have you soften your knees here, and I'm going to have you push your heels into the ground just slightly. There you go, okay? And now I'm going to have you from here lift slightly, okay? And now I'm going to have you push your shoulder blades down. Now it's important that she pushes her shoulder blades down, not back. We're not looking for scapular retraction. We're looking for scapular depression, okay? So sometimes what I'll do is I'll come around back at this point and put my fingers right underneath the inferior angle of the scapula, and I'm going to say, just push my thumbs just a little bit. Okay, so now she's leaning back, and what I'm going to ask her to do instead is pretend you're pushing your bra strap down. There you go. And that's a crazy thing to say, but people get that. They understand what you're talking about. So now her scapula depressed rather than retracted, and rather than her having extension. Now I'm going to check back in with that position here. Do you still feel like you're in a pretty neutral position?
Yeah.
Okay. So she found her position. She slightly contracted her gluteals by pushing her heels into the floor. Then I had her lift in here and then depress her shoulders using her serratus. And now I'm going to say, can you breathe? Mm-hmm. Okay, so I'm going to have you soften just a little bit here so that you can breathe. So we want you to be soft here and then just have a very slight contraction right here. So just slightly pull your belly button in. There you go. So then we pull in the abdominals, but you allow her to continue to breathe through her diaphragm. So what I would say is, for the next week, I'm going to have you, every single time you sit in a chair, do that activity. We're going to go back and forth. I'm going to find my neutral, slightly contract my gluteals by pushing my heels in, lift my chest, push my scapula down, breathe, and then just a slight inward with my belly button, okay? So by doing that, motor patterning is really more about repetition than it is about, about doing an exercise. So the motor pattern is going to become ingrained if you do it multiple times a day. Not like, I'm going to do my exercises now, so I'm going to do 10 repetitions. So if every single time you sit in a chair, you do that, it's going to end up taking just a minute or two, and then forget about it. Totally let it go out of your mind. But what will happen over the series of days and weeks is that you kind of automatically self-correct. So the next thing we're going to do is that very same stabilization activity, but in standing. So what we've already established is now Alicia's gone home, and she spent the last week, every time she sat down in a chair, she's done that adjustment. So she's come back now, and we talked about it, that she's feeling more comfortable with that. So the next stage would be to do the very same thing in standing. So what I would say is, okay, now that you understand how to do this in sitting, we're going to do it in standing. So every time you stand up, I'm going to have you do the same thing. So what you're going to do is, soften your knees and put your feet at a comfortable level, okay? And then you're going to bring your back, you're going to bring yourself into extension, into flexion, and then somewhere in between those two extremes is going to be your neutral position for now. And that neutral position is going to change throughout the day. So she may have just a slightly different amount of flexion or extension throughout the day. And by having her adjust throughout the day, she's not going to fatigue as much, and she's not going to have as much pain. So this is her neutral for right now. So how can she stabilize that? Again, if you ever so slightly push your heels into the ground, you'll feel your glutes contract. Now, if their whole body comes back, that's way too big of a contraction. So just a very slight contraction, okay? And then what we're going to do is have you lift in your chest just slightly, okay? And then shoulder blades down, perfect, but not back, okay? Soften here and just down, yep. And now we're going to keep breathing here, but we're going to just slightly push our belly button in, okay? Then this is the position now they're going to take notice of that position and then forget about it again. So now for the next week, every time you stand from a sitting position, you're going to take just 30 seconds to do that self-correction and then forget about it. So once you've mastered the positioning in sitting and the positioning in standing, then we're going to transition to dynamic activities. And the very basics would be going from sitting to stand and from standing to sit. So what we're going to do is, once again, find that comfortable position in sitting. So you're going to rock your pelvis back and forth, find that neutral position, okay? Now, one thing that I just want to point out is that Alicia does a very typical substitution, and what happens is whenever she does some self-correction, she pulls her knees together. So the very common substitutions would be the hip adductors. So a lot of times when people are trying to stabilize, they squeeze their knees together. Another really common substitution would be, instead of using the serratus, we're using the traps and the pecs. Okay, so we're doing this kind of thing. So what we're going to try to do is to inhibit the adductors as well as the pecs and the traps by contracting, again, the serratus, the abs, and the glutes. that reciprocal inhibition will not only allow good stabilization and contraction of strong muscles, but also will inhibit those muscles that tend to want to take over for that job. So I'm going to keep reminding Alicia then to soften her legs and to just push them out a little bit. And if it continues to be really challenging for her, what I might do is just even put that 4-inch playground ball between her knees so that she can kind of get a feel for, oh yeah, I keep squeezing this ball. So again, giving that proprioceptive feedback whenever you can will really help them to see how their body's moving and how they can make slight changes to change the intent of their movement pattern. Okay, so again, we're going to go back to extension, flexion, somewhere in the middle that feels comfortable for right now. And see, she can now do this on a regular chair as opposed to the therapy ball. So now that she's done it for a little bit of time, she doesn't need as much proprioceptive feedback from the ball, and she can start doing it right in the chair. Okay, she already corrected her knees here, which is very good. And again, coming from the bottom to the top, if you just have a slight contraction with your heels, a little lift, shoulders down, nice job. And then we're going to have soft breathing here, but the belly button's going to come in just a little bit. And then once you're in that position, you're going to, in order to rise from sitting to standing, using these muscles, what you're going to ask the person to do is to, not yet, I'll do it first, but is to kind of lean over their knees and then push their heels into the ground so that they're really facilitating their glutes. And then when they get all the way to standing, we're going to do that same activity where we check, find your neutral, little squeeze, lift, shoulders down, make sure you're breathing and belly button in, okay? So I'm going to have you do that now. So you're in that great position. I'm going to have you just lean forward over your knees and push through your heels to come up. That's it. Go ahead and lean forward. Very good. So what I noticed right away is the first thing she wanted to do was squeeze her knees together. So that's, and do this, okay? So that's a perfect example. I'm going to have you go ahead and sit back down again. Now, it's okay to use your, to stabilize with your hands if you need to. This time though, I'm going to actually have you consciously think about your knees coming forward and then staying here as you squeeze through here. Okay, so it's almost like you're going to feel like you're squeezing from the outside of your knees instead of the inside of your knees. Okay. So go ahead and bring your weight forward. Yep. A little bit more. Yep. Push. Nice job. Okay, so when she did that this time, her knees didn't come together, and you could see that she got that gluteal contraction. When she came up, though, she came into a lot of extension. So what I would say is at that point, as you're coming up, go ahead and sit back down again. So you're going to have your knees just a little bit apart. It's okay to lean forward more. That's not going to hurt anything. And then we're going to push through here, and then as you're coming up, belly button in. Okay, and that helps get the abdominals going. And then as you stand, shoulders down. And then you can do that self-correction in standing. There you go. Nice belly button in, shoulders down. There you go. Nice job. So we did sitting to standing, and the standing to sitting is really just the reverse process. But what I want Alicia to focus on is getting her standing position stable first before she lowers herself to the chair. So I'm going to have you just do what we did a week ago, where you find your neutral in standing, lift, shoulders down, belly button in. And now I'm going to make sure that she keeps her knees soft, and because she does tend to do that adductor squeeze, I'm going to actually say, as you bend forward, it's okay to reach for your chair like this, and that kind of helps you to know how far. Very good. All right. So what she did that I really liked was as she came down, she kind of pushed her knees out a little bit. That'll give her a nice gluteal contraction as she comes down. So she's already learning. That's very good. So I'm going to have you just demonstrate that one more time. So as she lowered herself to the chair, first she corrected here. It was okay for her to reach back. It kind of helps her know how far to bend. And then she pushed out with her knees and down. And then once she's here, she's again going to recheck her position and then kind of let go of it. Just go on with her business. The next progression that we're going to do is walking. So we, again, just to review, we did sitting, we did standing, and then we did sit to stand and stand to sit. So we're kind of slowly making this more of a dynamic activity. When it comes time for walking, what we're going to do is the same standing activity first, where we find our neutral, slight contraction through our heels, lift, shoulders down, make sure you're breathing, but the belly button's in a little bit. And then for walking, what's going to happen is every time I take a step forward, the leg that I'm standing on, I'm going to squeeze my gluteal muscle on that side. What's going to happen is the gluteal muscle is going to contract, and my diagonal abs are going to contract as well, okay? So what I'm going to say to Alicia is every time you take a step, I'm going to have you squeeze the buttock of that side. Step and squeeze. So Alicia, I'm going to have you start by finding your comfortable neutral and standing. And then I'm going to have you, walk past me. And every time you step onto a foot, you're going to squeeze the buttock on that side. Okay, and relax. And so the first thing that I saw was, you can come on back, Alicia. The first thing that I saw was, did you see how she was really propelling herself forward and she looked like the Tin Man? Okay, so that's because she did exactly what I told her to do. So I'm going to ask her to only think squeeze this time. Because remember, we don't want a total body contraction. We don't want even a full muscle contraction. We just want to engage the muscle. So as your heel strikes, just think to tighten slightly on that side, and then allow your arms to swing. Yep. There you go. That's a little more natural. Yep. Now this is going to take some time for her to feel natural and for her to not feel like the Tin Man. But the first step in it is to get that gluteal contraction, and then as that becomes more comfortable, I'll start reminding her to bring just ever so slightly a shoulder to a hip in order to elicit the obliques, okay? And then I'm going to remind her to keep her chest up, her shoulders down, so that serratus is engaged. That's going to be the beginning of the dynamic exercises, and this will go on to progress further and further, but this is a great beginning spot. What I would tell people with this activity is every time you walk through a doorway today, I want you to think about this for 3 steps and then forget about it. So again, the idea is that the motor planning happens when you keep repeating it over and over throughout the day. So if every time you sit, you do a self-correction. If every time you stand, you do a self-correction. And then if every time you walk through a doorway, you think about those steps for 3 or 4 steps and then forget about it. And that would be the beginning of her functional stabilization training.